Meanwhile, on the comic box...
Liam's back, and we're still talking horror comics. Kick it, Liam. That is not even remotely scary. That's like excited. Can you kick it again but be creepier?
No, I'd rather not. I'm not a horror guy, you know that. Wah, wah. That's about as best as I got for horror.
That'll do. Comics, I guess. Hello, everyone, and welcome to The Comic Box, part of the Geek to Geek podcast network. I am Rob, your friendly neighborhood comic geek, and joining us after, I think, quite the hiatus, if I'm remembering correctly, is Liam. Yay! I was going to try and come up with something that means roaming that starts with L. But you said yay first. Hi, Liam. How's it going?
It's going well. How about yourself, Rob?
Not bad. So last week, we were going to record together, and sort of at the last minute, you had other things going on, and so I very much fumbled through like a half-hour episode where I was trying to remember. Like, I had written down a short list of horror comics that I thought we could talk about, but it certainly wasn't a full list of comics I had read, and so it wasn't a great, I'm just going to say it wasn't a great episode. And as soon as I was done, I sat down and wrote like 10, 12 other horror comics that I have read and really enjoyed. So we're going to keep talking about horror comics this week because there's a lot of them, so I don't see a reason why we wouldn't, right?
I suppose not.
Yeah.
And it is one of the big tent poles of the early comic book industry.
It is. I was actually, it'll be in the Weekly Geekery, but I was talking to Ray, and apparently Dr. Ray, frequent guest on the show, grew up reading horror comics. So I'm going to see if I can't get him on before the end of the month, because he used to read his dad and his uncle's comic books, and that's what they had, was a lot of those EC, like classic horror comics that stopped being published after the Comics Code Authority.
Very cool.
Yeah. All right, but let's do some Weekly Geekery. Now, you have been gone for at least, 4 weeks or something off the show at this point.
Yeah, it feels like.
It's been a while. So what have you been up to?
Well, you know me and my love of pop vinyl collection.
Oh, God. Yeah.
And there have been a few recently released convention exclusives. Ones that are exclusive to certain stores after their initial release at the convention.
Right.
Then they, limited number go to stores outside. So I was able to secure myself a Beastman from the Masters of the Universe, which is one of the ones that I really wanted the most. I also got a Destro with a metallic shiny head. That was another one that I wanted. Of course, that's a G.I. Joe. And then I got the flocked version of Lockjaw from the Inhumans.
Okay, now you haven't read a single Inhumans comic, is that correct?
That is correct.
And
other than the Earth X and that whole
right, and now
involvement of their characters.
And you haven't previously bought any G.I. Joe or He-Man pops. Am I correct there?
You are not correct there.
Because I remember the image you showed me of the set that you had, and that was almost all DC, though I suppose that wasn't nearly the 250 you own.
No. I do already have a Cobra Commander from G.I. Joe.
Okay.
And I do already have a Lockjaw from the Masters of the Universe.
Okay. So now you have two different Lockjaws.
No, I've got
you said
the Lockjaw and the Beastman.
Right, you said you previously had a Lockjaw from Masters of the Universe. I'm not a He-Man guy. I just assumed there was a character on that show called Lockjaw.
Yeah, there is.
So you have a Lockjaw from Masters of the Universe, and now you have a Lockjaw from the Inhumans.
I'm sorry. Trapjaw. That's not...
Trapjaw. That is not as good of a name.
Well, he does have a steel jaw that he, bites people with.
Yeah, that's neat. Hey, fun fact, a lot of those characters were created by Paul Dini, the co-creator of Harley Quinn. He actually created Orko, helped create Orko, and the reason there is a giant 0 on his chest, and it is a 0, is because that is the number of people who would buy an Orko toy.
I had an Orko toy as a child.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure I did too. But that's not the point. The point is when they designed the character, they put a 0 on his chest because that's how many toys they thought they would sell of such a stupid character.
He is not a very strong character, admittedly.
No. Now, he's no Snarf, granted.
No. Snark, no.
Yeah. But, okay, so I don't want to ask what you had to do or pay in order to get con exclusives. Are you selling Pops as well, or are you simply continuing to grow your collection?
I continue to grow.
Cool. And so at what point do you have to start making furniture out of Pop vinyl boxes in order to have any space to freely move around your apartment?
Before that becomes necessary, that's when you start opening Pops and taking them out of boxes, so they don't take as much space on the walls and such. So.
But the boxes are just barely larger than the toys themselves, aren't they? And then you can't stack them, so you need to buy shelves and things. Like, there's no way.
There's a solid inch on all sides of the figure that the box fills up. So
yeah, but then that allows you to stack it. If you take them all out of the boxes, now you have to buy shelving units and stuff. So you're in the end, you're losing space that way. Your logic is flawed, Liam.
Not if you already have shelving units.
When will you admit that you have a problem?
When I am literally buried in them after an avalanche and have to eat my own arm in order to survive,
or a selection of your mother's delicious preserves.
Yes,
that is a Simpsons reference.
I will bounce a basketball.
Yes, with one arm
as many times as I can.
That's right,
and then try to beat that record in order to keep my sanity.
Yes. Okay. That I'm almost okay with. All right, so besides wasting money on a fad that will never return any type of investment for you, what else have you been up to?
Well, I have been enjoying the recent season of Rick and Morty.
Okay.
I don't know if that's one that you're as much into, but...
I saw the previous season. I think I've seen the first... two. I saw the first episode and then the Pickle Rick. I don't know if that was the first episode or the second, but I think that's all I've seen.
I think that was second.
Okay, I've seen the first two or three of the most recent season.
Yeah, I enjoyed it. I mean, there's been a bit of flack. Some people haven't enjoyed it as much, I guess, but I still really enjoy it. It really helps fill that void that Futurama left when that went off the air, so that will forever be my favorite show. But Rick and Morty, it does a very good job of helping to ease that pain.
Sure. Okay. Did you try and participate in that crazy Szechuan sauce whatever where people were getting upset and throwing sauce packets at people because they ran out of the short supply at the couple McDonald's? I don't know if that was going on in Minnesota at all.
I did, but I didn't go crazy. I just went to McDonald's and asked if they had it, and they said they didn't, and that was the end of it.
It's a good story.
So, yeah, then later I read that they only had certain locations that had it, and then also those certain locations only had 5 to 20 packets each. So I was like, oh, I'm glad I didn't spend too much of my day trying to get that.
Now, you have to think with a company like McDonald's to only make 5 to 20 packets is it for every single McDonald's had 20 packets? Or were there only a couple participating? Because you have to think lose on doing that versus actually making a full batch of packets or something.
Yeah. And I think that the fact that there is that much customer interest in it leading up to its release should show them that they should just do a full release rather than do what they did. And it was, certain stores, and they didn't know which one, received a certain amount, and apparently it was random. And some stores got only 5 packets.
And then they wrongfully believed that people would show up and still buy McDonald's if they weren't able to get it.
And that people would be calm about it if you had to tell them that no, they were not going to get any after they had camped out or whatever. Yeah,
a show that encourages people to literally go insane and tear holes in time and space in order to find this sauce. And they're big enough fans to try and actually hunt it down because of a cartoon telling them to.
Yeah.
It's the plot of a bad horror film.
And there was like an app or something to track the sauce and stuff. Yeah. I mean, yeah, it was like, clearly there's enough interest here that you could make a full batch of sauce. And I mean, what does it take? It's like cardboard and corn syrup.
Right.
I can't imagine that it takes a lot to make that sauce.
All right. But comics, have you read, it's been over a month. Have you read any of the comics that I loaned you a year ago when we started the first time you were on the podcast? And I said I was going to loan you things so you could tell us about it the following week. Have you done that? Specifically Swamp Thing, because I wanted to talk Swamp Thing a little bit today.
I have not read all of the volumes cover to cover, but I have read one of them cover to cover and started the second one.
Okay. Was any of that accomplished in the last 4 weeks?
Not the last 4 weeks, no.
Have you read any other comic books in the last 4 weeks?
I read the Blade Runner comic book that I came across at a secondhand store.
Oh, was that an adaptation of the first movie, or was it like some other stories in the same world?
Yeah, it was like an adaptation from the movie.
Interesting. How was it?
You know, it was predictably kind of like bland. You know, they kind of like missed a lot of the real poignancy of the movie, but it was story-wise a fairly faithful adaptation.
I think you could do a good comic book adaptation of it, but you would need to use today's like computer rendering technology to make the imagery really sharp, and they could even do it in almost like an anime style, and I feel like that would do a really good job of adapting the first film. But that's me, and I'm not a guy that likes, you know, manga style comics generally, but just in my head, that sort of, you know, futuristic Tokyo looking thing.
Yeah, like Neo Tokyo kind of thing.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Is there anything else that you wanted? Anything else exceptionally geeky that you've been doing in the last few weeks?
I got one of those preloaded NES consoles.
Oh, how you enjoying that?
It's fun. I played a bunch of Mario Kart right away, and the Super Mario Brothers, of course. So yeah, it's pretty awesome.
Neat. Okay.
Yeah.
Anything else? Right? Can I do mine? That's
yeah. You can do yours.
Wonderful.
You do you, baby.
That's where a good co-host would just ask me to keep the show moving, but that's okay.
Yes, sir.
There it is. We don't expect a whole lot from you. All right. So I had to jot down all this stuff because I was trying to remember. It's been an odd week. First of all, last weekend I went to the Fallcon with friends, including Dr. Ray. I went, one of my friends in the Marauders MN, which is the Harry Potter cosplay group I'm in, went as Tonks. She has a new Tonks costume, and
cool.
Took her little daughter with her as Princess Leia because she's a Star Wars fan. And then Dr. Ray showed up as Yorick Brown again from Y the Last Man, and actually had a couple people recognize him, including comic book creators. He ended up sitting at a table with the creators of a comic book, just talking Brian K. Vaughan comics for like half an hour.
That's awesome.
Yeah, so
that is a good costume. It's just clearly obscure.
Exactly. For now. Like, wait until finally gets turned into a show or a movie or whatever. It keeps floating around. So I went as my Mad Eye Moody for like the 5th time or whatever this year that I've done something as my Mad Eye Moody costume. But it went well because I hung out with the other Harry Potter cosplays. And for a thing that was strictly a comic book convention, unlike other just sort of, you know, like when we did Minnesota Fan Fest, it was kind of everything. This was put on by the Minnesota Comic Book Association. But there was a decent number of like Harry Potter or Hogwarts student costumes or people just walking around in you know, T-shirts and that sort of stuff. The fandom was actually pretty widely represented, which was pretty cool. I don't know if that's just because it's an enduring fandom or Fantastic Beasts or what it was, but I put a whole bunch of pictures. I tried to take pictures of a bunch of different cosplayers and stuff, so that is all up on Twitter, including Dr. Ray's Yorick Brown. As far as things that I have read, I went back and I tried to dig up as many of those old horror comics, or rather the ones I didn't really mention last week. I didn't get through all of them, but I did read Green Lantern vs. Aliens, which was...
Oh, really?
Yeah. It's not bad. Like, I owned the individual issues. The first issue is Hal Jordan, And then the following 3 issues are Kyle Rayner. And so it's Hal Jordan runs into the aliens, and he's with a bunch of other Green Lanterns, and they're investigating because a Green Lantern was killed on this planet. And so they trace the ring back, and they find the aliens, and they decide to put them on Mogo so that Mogo will keep them safe.
Okay. Without going too far into it, do we see a chest burster come out of Chip?
Out of Chip, we do not, unfortunately.
Missed opportunity.
Because they sort of play that as this was Hal Jordan doing the what he felt was the right thing, because he's like, they're just like the shark. They're a perfect killing machine. That doesn't make them evil. So we're just going to put them somewhere where Mogo can look after them, make sure no one else is harmed. And then we flash forward to Kyle Rayner. The Green Lantern Corps is gone. He's the only Green Lantern left. And he gets a distress call from a group of former Green Lanterns, who, like Salak, Brick, Ash, the Green Man, and they've contacted him in order to get his help in going to this planet where a ship crash landed on this planet. And they got the distress call, and they're like, Green Lanterns caused this. A Green Lantern needs to solve it. And obviously, it's sort of an Elseworlds tale because most of those people die, even though they're currently around in the Green Lantern comic books now. Salak's been around for a long time. And they actually leave him alone for a while, and the theory is because he kind of looks like them. But because it's the only way to tell a Green Lantern story where there's a lot of risk, he loses his ring and has to figure out whether it's okay to kill these creatures, and I'm just going to spoil it. In the end, he nukes the place, as you do at the end of every Alien movie. You know?
That's the only way to be sure.
Exactly. And so it's him trying to deal with this idea, and he falls for the girl, and the girl turns out to be an android, because of course that so there's a lot of the tropes that are normally in Alien things, but they throw a Green Lantern in there for good measure. And it was kind of, because obviously as soon as he gets his ring, he's safe, because he can just put a bubble around himself and anybody else who's still alive. And then they're like, you need to do something about this. He's like, but they're not evil. And they're like, yeah, but you need to do something about this. So in the end, he just makes the call, and he feels really crappy about it, and that's kind of the end. It ends fairly bleak. But it was really good. It's 4 issues.
Yeah, I like that.
Yeah, I read a comic that I think you would love, so I'll have to give it to you next. Ray bought it and then loaned it to me. It's called Demon. It is an indie comic about a guy. I don't know. Can I spoil it? A little bit?
Little spill?
A little bit of a spoilage. He's suicidal, and then he kills himself, but he wakes up again.
Ooh.
And tries to kill himself multiple times and keeps waking up. And eventually you find out why he's waking up, how he's waking up. And it's weird. And it's intended to get more extreme and dark and funny because it's being dark every single page. And it does. It gets to the point where I don't think I can say it without putting an explicit tag on the episode. So I think it's something that you would definitely enjoy. I don't know if I was a huge fan, but it was certainly an interesting comic. And more importantly, there's a big foreword by the writer saying this was him sort of exercising his own demons when he was feeling depressed and suicidal. Is he just turned to this? And so this character kind of is him in a way.
Yeah.
So I read that. I read volumes 3 and 4 of Descender, which I still suggest. I still think that's a good comic. I like the art. It's sort of this watercolor art style. It's the story of broadly a robot boy in the future who might be the secret to these giant robots who came and killed a whole bunch of people. Think Celestials in Marvel Comics. And so that's still good. I'm enjoying that. I read those on Hoopla. I also read Giant Days Volume 5. And then I found out there's a Volume 6 coming, so I said screw it, and I went and I ordered all 5 volumes of Giant Days in trade and pre-ordered the 6th. So I spent a lot of money on comic books, but it's a good series. So, and then I started reading Dark Knight by Paul Dini, and this is the single graphic novel he wrote about his experience when he was, I guess it was back when he was working on Batman or something, but he was attacked and beaten, and sort of how he tried to deal with that. And it's obviously a very personal and emotional story, and how he sort of looked at it through this lens of, superheroes, because that was the world he was living in at the time, working on Batman. And it's won a bunch of awards, so I look forward to finishing it. I'm kind of at that point where he's been injured, and I think he's maybe in the hospital at this point, all bandaged up, or maybe he's back home and he's very much a shut-in. Yeah. And then as far as watching things, the wife and I are still going through The Office. We just finished season 3 of The Office. And then I've watched season 1 of Always Sunny in Philadelphia.
Ah.
Now, I have to imagine that's a favorite show of yours.
Oh, it is one of my absolute favorites. I watch every episode multiple times.
Because everyone on that show is absolutely a horrible person.
Charlie is not entirely horrible, as you learn over the course of 10 seasons.
Except he's absolutely down, just as everybody else is, with pulling scams and pretending to be a handicapped Vietnam veteran in order to get free lap dances from strippers.
Oh yeah, he's not entirely, clean, but compared to those other ones, he has the biggest heart of gold in that whole show. But yeah, Danny DeVito is so great in that show.
I watched the first episode of season 2 where everybody gets hit by cars.
Yep.
So the first Danny DeVito, and I can see how that just is going to really raise the stakes for the show in general.
Oh yeah, his involvement as a character allows them to do so much. It goes really crazy in some episodes, but it's a lot of fun. Every episode is fun.
Yeah. Now, have you watched Gifted at all?
I have not yet, no.
Okay. I haven't caught it yet either. And I think people are saying that a couple episodes of The Inhumans is out as well, and I've heard that's terrible.
Yeah, I've heard generally negative buzz on that one myself.
But at some point I'm still going to try and find time for it, and then I guess people liked Gifted. It's got Blink, and I was listening to the most recent episode of Geektitude, and Joe and the guest that he had on there were talking about the show and how they both, well, I don't know if Joe had seen it. Maybe the guest had. And she said she kind of liked it. I don't know. I'm curious, at least. I don't know that I want to pick up another comic book TV show. I have a hard enough time just trying to keep up with the ones that are already out there.
Yeah.
But I'll certainly watch it. I'll certainly binge it, if it's good, later. But I didn't know if you had caught it or not yet. I'm going to see if I can. Did I mention that I did watch all of The Tick? You don't know this. You don't actually listen to the show when you're not on it, do you?
I do, but I'm a few episodes back, admittedly.
Okay. I did watch the entire first season of The Tick. I don't know if I mentioned that or not. It was decent.
I think you mentioned it to me personally, but not...
Okay.
Yeah.
And it was decent, but that is it for my weekly geekery, and quite honestly, I think that's quite enough to be going on with. I found my Nightmare on Elm Street comics, but I didn't get a chance to read them yet. And then I found my Freddy vs. Jason vs. Ash, but I started looking at the first issue. I'm pretty sure it's a sequel. I thought it was the original comic series. I think the one that I have, it seems like it's starting out with Jason in the lake, which I thought he was at the end of Freddy vs. Jason, but then he's saying something about going after Ash, like right away. So I don't know. I didn't really dig into it more deeply than that.
Okay.
But yeah, that is it for my weekly geekery. So I think we take a quick commercial break and then we start diving into some of these horror comics. What do you say?
Sure.
All right, we will be right back.
I'm Void.
And I'm Beej.
And together, we're the Geek to Geek podcast. Well, we make it. It is kind of us, but I guess it's separate.
Every week, we pick a topic from geek or digital culture and chat about it for a while.
And you're invited. We talk about books and movies, games, comics, the internet.
Or really whatever we feel like.
Yeah, that too.
So look for the Geek to Geek podcast on iTunes.
Or wherever your podcasts are sold. Or downloaded. Or whatever.
Hey everyone, I'm Katie.
And I'm Chelsea, and we're the hosts of the podcast
Tea Time with Katie and Chelsea.
We are two best friends who love pop culture. We try to have a female perspective on things, but we really just talk about anything we like. What are some recent topics we've done, Katie?
Well, we've talked about girl power songs, Wonder Woman, Veronica Mars, young adult fiction novels, San Diego Comic-Con, and so much more. So grab your cup of tea or whatever your drink of choice is and download our podcast on iTunes or Stitcher and start listening today.
Hi, my name is Joe Hogan, and I'm a geek. And if you're currently listening to this, there's a good chance you're a geek too. So check out my podcast, Geektitude. Each week, I talk with somebody about their geek aptitude. Sometimes I talk to people in a geeky profession. Sometimes it's someone doing something really cool with their geekiness. Often it's another geeky podcaster. But it's always someone who wants to share their inner geek. So join me each week as we come together to geek out about all the geeky stuff we love. And remember, this week, keep it geek.
And we're back.
Took us a while, jeez.
It did, didn't it? Didn't it? Well, we have a lot of shows on the Geek to Geek podcast network now, and we encourage you to listen to all of them and to give us reviews. We're still trying to hit that number 25, that sweet spot of 25 reviews. And I haven't talked to you.
I thought the number 23 was the most important number.
Why is 23 important?
You have to ask Jim Carrey that.
Okay. I didn't know if that's where you were going. I thought you were referencing something I didn't understand. You were just making a bad reference to a movie that also wasn't very good.
Mid-2000s piece of crap. Yep, exactly.
Was not a great film. I mean, good for Jim Carrey for, stretching his legs a little bit. I think he's
and making like $23 million on it, I'm sure.
That's the magic number. All right, so I want to talk about horror comics, but I also want to talk about that new Justice League trailer. Now, did you get a chance to see that?
I did.
What did you think? I think it doesn't make me care a whole lot more than the last one.
See, I'm already somewhat excited about this movie.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not going to be like mental. I'm not going to tell myself it's going to be amazing. I think it's going to be fun. It doesn't make me want to see it any more than I already did. So it didn't really do anything to drum up any particular new interest in me. But yeah, I'm going to be there. I'm going to see it.
I feel like it was doing its best to play up Aquaman more for some reason, like this bro dude Aquaman, of just him always being like, yeah, every time he does anything. And it's like...
Brokewoman is definitely all over that trailer.
Is that what we're calling him? Or is it...
That's what I'm calling him.
Or is it AquaBro? Aquadude?
Ooh. Duder man?
Dude, no. I mean, it's Aqua, got to be in there somewhere just because the fact that the end of it is man. I tell you what, we'll throw it out to all the people on Twitter and or Reddit and or Slack. Send us your suggestions. And I'm sure somebody else probably already has a hashtag going of like AquaBro is probably what I would think it would be.
Probably.
Though I'm just happy that Snyder finally has a character in The Flash where it makes sense to use a ton of slow-mo.
Yeah, exactly. He can use as much as he wants, and it's all justified.
Yes, exactly. So let's hope that goes well. Okay. Well, I'm still not... I mean, we'll do a prep episode, I guess, and talk about the history of the Justice League, because it's vastly different from whatever you're going to see on there. Though it might...
Hashtag, where's that GL?
Yeah. And if not... I mean, I suppose it's kind of close to the New 52 origin of the Justice League, because I believe they first got together to fight against an invasion by the Parademons and Darkseid. But certainly not the original where... Was it Starro?
Starro!
Was it the Starro, the Star Conqueror?
It was Starro, the Star Conqueror.
Yep, so it was Hal Jordan, Green Lantern, it was the Martian Manhunter, the Flash, Green Arrow, Black Canary.
Aquaman?
And Aquaman, was it?
Yep. Yeah, Aquaman was there.
Because they retconned things to have, Superman and Batman involved, but not originally. Not originally. It was different characters. Okay, so let's get into our topic of the week. Bring us into that topic of the week there, Liam.
Topic of the week.
That'll do. All right, so I have a list of other horror comics that I wanted to bring up. Do you want me to kick it off with some of mine, or do you want to kick it off with Swamp Thing, because that's the one of these I know you've read?
Why don't you kick it off with what you want to kick it off with, and then we can talk about the Swamp Thing.
Okay. So first, last week we were mostly talking about comic book adaptations of horror films, and somehow I have no idea why I didn't mention the 28 Days Later comic, because it is really good. It follows the female lead from the first movie, and it bridges the gap between the first and second films, sort of, in that she is in a refugee camp after being rescued and is known as what was the name of the place that they used as a military base? So it was that 3, because it was her, the girl, and then the lead actor, right? And so she's in a refugee camp, and an American journalist contacts her and shows up and says, I want you to take me back into London, because supposedly they've created a safe zone, but the rest of the world doesn't know what's going on. So I want you to be my guide and bring me back in. And she refuses a bunch of times and eventually decides to do it, and leads them back in, and then they're getting chased by the military, and there's a bunch of stuff that happens, a bunch of people die, and then she ends up in that same first settlement that the main characters of 28 Weeks Later are in. Have you seen both of these films, Liam?
I saw the first one, the 28 Days Later.
Okay. So 28 Weeks Later follows the story mostly of a family, father and kids, who are begin the repatriation. Did I say that right? People moving back into the UK. And so it's this highly fortified city, and then obviously somebody gets infected and all hell breaks loose. So the main character, this of the comic book, the female from and I don't know why I can't remember, Serena or Selena, one of the two, badass lady. She goes from being in the encampment to eventually, in the end, I guess that's kind of spoilers, but ends up in that sort of first city, and is there when things go wrong there as well. So it was actually really interesting. The next one that I wanted to bring up as far as movies go, though it's backwards, is 30 Days of Night, and its many sequels, including Dark Days was the other one that was made into a movie. And I wasn't a huge fan of the 30 Days of Night film. I feel like I need to revisit it at some point.
I enjoyed it well enough. I didn't think it was, like, amazing. I mean, Josh Hartnett as your lead actor is not, like, a great idea if you want some real meaningful acting done and not just a handsome face. But I enjoyed that movie well enough.
Okay. And see, I would disagree with you about Josh Hartnett. Part of that is I'm a friend of the family. I grew up knowing his, younger siblings and stuff and hanging out with them. But
so nepotism. Okay.
Yes, absolute nepotism. But also, I think he's a really good actor. He needs to be in the right roles. Like in Penny Dreadful, I thought he did really well.
And that opening to Sin City, he's good.
Yep.
I mean, it's brief, but
in Bun Raku, if you've never seen that movie, he's really good. He does well in period pieces as far as the character acting. So maybe it's less so for like a regular average Joe kind of character. But the original 30 Days of Night comic is great. And the art by Ben Templeton is excellent. And because it's all painted, and so all the vampires are extremely exaggerated, and it's really good. And then Dark Days was great too, because it follows the wife of the main guy, because he, spoilers, dies at the end of 30 Days of Night. And so now she's like this badass vampire hunter kind of chick. And so she writes a book about her experience there, knowing that a bunch of vampires are coming after her. And I believe it starts with her in an auditorium talking about her book, and then they chain the doors closed, and she turns on UV lights, and a bunch of vampires in the audience burn up in order to prove that they're real. It's actually a really entertaining sequel comic. The movie was
that sounds
okay.
Pretty cool, actually.
Say again?
Oh, I was saying that sounds pretty cool, actually.
Yeah.
Trapping them in the... Yeah.
I know you're not a big horror guy, but I think you might enjoy him, if only for the really great art.
I like vampire stuff. I'm just not mental about it.
Right. There's a couple DC Elseworlds, because obviously Elseworlds can tell all sorts of tales, and a lot of those are really weird horror stories. Like there's Batman Castle of the Bat, where Batman is Frankenstein's monster. There's the Batman Red Rain books, which I'm actually a big fan of, where Batman fights Dracula. The first one is just called Batman Dracula. I think it's Red Rain, and then it's Crimson Mist, and then there's another one, I think. But the short version is Batman fights Dracula and ends up getting bitten. And then it tells the story of sort of his descent into becoming a vampire and what happens after that. I really want to talk spoilers because there's some amazing stuff in there. But let's say he dispatches his villains a little more violently than he does in the standard DC universe. But I have no idea where those are. I have all three of those trades.
Did Two-Face become One-Face?
And that one face is all torn to shreds, perhaps.
Okay.
But I loaned all three of them to somebody, and I feel like I never got them back. So I don't know who I loaned them to. There's a good chance it's Fletch. Fletch is kind of a comic book sinkhole where I loan him stuff, and then it never makes its way back to Minnesota from New York when he comes to visit.
Well,
I can't blame him. There's only so much room in a suitcase, but at some point I need to just give in and go buy new copies because I really want to read those. There's obviously the Batman Gotham by Gaslight, where Batman goes after Jack the Ripper, who I believe is the Joker.
Well, of course.
And that's actually going to be the next animated film, I think.
Okay. That sounds kind of cool.
Yeah, and the whole thing is I believe Gotham by Gaslight might be the very first Elseworlds tale. But I'm not certain. Because I know there was also like the really early ones, like Superman Red Sun, where for the first time, they told the story of what if Superman, in that one, his rocket obviously lands in Russia.
Which is awesome.
I feel like Gotham by Gaslight might have been the very first one because they're like, hey, we want to do this story, but it doesn't fit at all in continuity. And they're like, it sounds great, go for it. And they kind of created the Elseworlds imprint around this idea of telling cool stories. And the last one, which is honestly completely ridiculous, is JLA, Island of Dr. Moreau. Where I think the main character is Snapper Carr. I have it on my shelf, but I haven't read it recently. And he goes, and so Dr. Moreau has a group of, animal hybrid people, right? Because that's the whole point of the Island of Dr. Moreau.
Yeah.
Except they also have superpowers. So the Flash is a cheetah, Superman is like a lion, Aquaman is like half dolphin. God, is Green Lantern? Somebody has like electric eels on their arm, and that's like the Green Lantern one, because they were fused partially with electric eels, and then I don't remember what the other animal is. There's like a hawk. There's what is Wonder Woman? Another big cat, I think. Wonder Woman's a gorilla. It's different. It's not very, I think I also have JLA versus Predator, where they run into predators that learned how to mimic the powers of the Justice League.
Ooh, that would be pretty cool, actually.
So, I have some pretty stupid ones in my Elseworlds, but I was really big into Batman, specifically Batman and Justice League Elseworlds tales, just because I think they're both archetypes that you can do a lot with. Let's see, I included Batwoman with a question mark because a lot of it has to do with horror elements, kind of like the early Moon Knight comics. I have Black Magic, which is a Greg Rucka comic, Everybody Drink, and is currently in its second volume, if you will. So they did the first number of books. It went out as a trade. That was a couple years ago now, I think. And now they're finally starting up again because that's the way Image Comics, indie comics work, is they fit it in around their other stuff. And that is about a woman named Rowan Black, who is a female detective, who is also a real witch. And the whole comic is in black and white except for elements of magic. And those are in color. And it actually works really well, and the art is gorgeous. I have a comic here called Resurrection, which was a random pull I took from a box. It's written by Mark Guggenheim, and I think that's the same guy who was like showrunner or whatever on Arrow. I think. And it is about aliens. Aliens, think zombie apocalypse, except aliens, and then the aliens leave, we think. And Bill Clinton is in it. He's not the main character.
Aww.
But you find out he was hiding in a bunker for like 10 years or something.
With Monica?
Because this takes place... No.
Aww.
Just Bill. There's no Hillary or no children, I don't think, in there. And so it's an interesting book. There's 2 volumes of that one. And again, it's this idea of sort of think The Walking Dead, but aliens, an alien apocalypse instead of zombies. There's a comic called Revival, which is about a small town where for a just a couple of days or one day or something, a number of people rose from the dead, but not everybody, and it wasn't a constant thing, and they're not zombies, but something is obviously wrong with them, and some of them go insane, or other things happen. And I was reading that on Hoopla for quite a while because there are several volumes of it on there, and I really got into it for a while. So I don't want to use my Hoopla rentals to go back and reread it, but I do suggest it. I think it's good. And I got two more here. One is the Jonan Vasquez, the guy who created Invader Zim, and I don't know if they count as horror, but I would assume so in my mind.
Oh, some of that. Yeah.
Yeah, well, that's Johnny the Homicidal Maniac, and then its sort of companion comic, Squee.
Which I love.
Which is about Johnny the Homicidal Maniac's neighbor,
Yep.
a little boy named Todd, who is nicknamed Squee because that's the noise he makes because he's always terrified because horrible things keep happening to him.
Yeah, I love Squee, personally.
Okay, yes, he ends up going to class with the son of Satan and then goes on a play date over at their house, goes for dinner. He gets abducted by aliens, I think more than once.
He is walking to school with his one and only friend, who is then attacked by a dog and eaten because he refuses to give up his peanut butter and jelly sandwich.
Yes, I was going to say. He's like, just give him your lunch. Never, it's peanut butter and jelly.
Yeah.
So these are incredibly violent comics.
But they're black
that is
and white,
sort of,
so that's something.
Yes, but that's kind of his way. It's him getting out. Johnny, I feel, was really him getting out his inner demons. The main character is a goth kid who kind of hates society and murders a bunch of people. And eventually it gets an ongoing plot of why he's killing people and if he has a greater purpose in the universe. Squee is just single page or just a couple page little stories of horrible things happening to a little boy who, despite it all, is surviving through it and doing his best to stay positive.
Yeah.
Think Butters on South Park, but
Precisely.
I don't know. But like goth horror level.
Like everything terrible that happens to Morty happens to Squee. Only he has the attitude of Butters.
Right. Or if you've seen the Invader Zim episode where the other really stupid aliens show up, those aliens are also in Squee and are equally stupid there.
Yeah, they are.
And there's actually more to this sort of thing. There was another comic that he did called I Feel Sick, which only ran for just several issues, and it was the story of another girl that lives in that world who actually dated Johnny the Homicidal Maniac for a couple of issues before he decides he's going to kill her in order to preserve the happy moment or whatever, and she beats him up and escapes and is, I think, the only person to escape him in his comic. And so it's about her world and how she starts sort of hallucinating and going insane. Yeah, so they're not necessarily horror in the strictest sense, more horror comedy, I guess.
Yeah.
It's certainly black humor and has elements of horror and sci-fi, lots of, violence and blood and that sort of thing.
Yeah, a definite gothic vibe.
Yeah, but I like that you also like Squee because I feel like that's right up your alley as well.
Yeah, that issue where he has his friend eaten is the first one I ever saw. I just saw it on the shelf at Hot Comics in New Hope and picked it up and started reading through it and was laughing my butt off, so I bought it. And then anytime I saw another Squee comic, I would just buy that. So
now, is Squee the one that also has the True Tales of Human Horror, whatever they're called?
That doesn't ring a bell, so I'm assuming no.
Okay. I think it is. I think maybe it's only in the trade, or maybe it wasn't in the issues you have.
Okay.
But it's Real Tales of Human Misery or something, and you would absolutely love. They're the blackest humor. It's just a single page story that doesn't have to do with Squee. My absolute favorite that had me rolling was a woman who runs into a hospital and is screaming like, my baby, you have to look. And it's just this little baby and, all wrapped up and smiling. And then the doctor goes and says, well, let's take a look, and uses his stethoscope, looks at it, says, oh God, everybody make way. He runs, throws the child out a window. The child explodes. And then he just puts his arm on the woman's shoulder and says, I'm sorry, if only we had more time.
I had seen that one, and you are right. That one had me rolling also.
It is so dark, but just so completely out there, you know.
And the baby has the calmest, like, what's going on kind of look on its face, and then just boom.
And boom, and we find out the baby is a bomb. So if you have a really dark sense of humor, or you want to know where some of the crazier aspects of Invader Zim came from, you'll realize just how tame that show is once you read his other stuff.
Yeah.
And the last thing I have, and I have no idea how I didn't mention this, is the Black Monday Murders. I love the Black Monday Murders. It is so dark. The art is absolutely creepy. In the most recent episode, they actually meet the dark god that everybody prays to or whatever. And it's this idea that, you know, all the financial markets are run by this couple schools, they call them, but basically these cabals of financiers, and the idea that when market crashes happen, it has to do with resetting this cycle or people not making the right sacrifices. It's really interesting, but it's also very dark. I mean, people get killed, and a lot of it they speak in
sacrifices, so I would assume it does get pretty dark. Yeah.
Well, the comic book, it was actually suggested to me by Sava from Two British Nerds, who was on the show way back when kind of we were first starting. It was, I want to say, one of the earlier episodes. And he had mentioned that comic to me, and I got hooked. I mean, I absolutely loved it. Each comic is double thick, which is great. But it begins with, like, the famous stock market crash of the 20s, and the idea of those people jumping out the windows weren't committing suicide. They were sacrifices. They were being thrown out.
Oh.
And the story kind of starts from there as this nice what if. And then it just gets deeper and darker. And kind of like how Futurama has the alien language all over the place, there is a language that is spoken here of, I guess it's some sort of demonic language. And I don't know that there's a proper translation. I don't know if there are fans out there that have figured it out. They don't use subtitles. They just do it more like, you know, R2-D2, where somebody says something in this language and somebody else responds back to them in a way that tells you what it was they said, you know?
Yeah.
But it's really good. If you would want to read something, it is not a humorous book at all. It's a very serious, you know, sort of suspense, horror, mystery book. And I really enjoy it.
All right.
Now, before we do Swamp Thing then, is there any other horror or horror-themed books? I know you like stuff that's dark humor, but do you have anything that I don't know about or haven't mentioned that you enjoy that would be considered a horror comic?
I've brought up the Arsenic Lullabies before, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
That's, again, something in the vein of Squee, where it's not really a horror comic. But one of the main reoccurring characters is a character by the name of Voodoo Joe, who is himself a voodoo witch doctor who has been cursed with this voodoo mask and has to enact revenge on other people's behalf in order to keep the curse from consuming him. And he has a zombie fetus army, so he finds that fetuses are much more easy to manage than a full-size zombie. So,
sure.
Yeah, it gets pretty dark, but it's also very, very, very funny.
It's a really weird book. It's really weird. But anyway, let's talk Swamp Thing, I guess. So the comics that I loaned you are written by Alan Moore. Same guy who did Watchmen, same guy who did From Hell, same guy who did everything that's considered great. What?
The Dark Knight?
No, that's not Alan Moore.
I know, that's Frank Miller.
Yeah. What are you doing? No. But League of Extraordinary Gentlemen. The things get turned into movies that he then hates because he says they're not faithful to his work.
Well, to be fair, The League of Extraordinary Gentlemen is one of the worst movies ever.
Yes, it is. It is absolutely terrible. And it does.
It's not even enjoyable watching as like a cheesy bad movie kind of a thing. It's just awful.
No, it's a bad film and has very, very little to do with the comic book.
Yeah. Any cleverness or anything that was fun from the comic was just totally lacking.
Right.
And I mean, when the woman who played La Femme Nikita is your third biggest star, you know you're in trouble.
Yeah. Though I'm okay with comic book movies having no-name actors. I almost prefer
Oh, yeah. That's fine. If they can act.
Sure. Yeah. But I thought that was one of the strengths of Watchmen is none of those actors necessarily, like you had, Jeffrey Dean Morgan and recognizable actors and stuff, but nobody really there was no Tom Cruise, there was no Ryan Reynolds, there was no big popular actor that's been in a ton of movies lately.
Yeah, Billy Crudup is the biggest, and I mean he's an actor, he's in things, but he's not like a Tom Cruise or a Brad Pitt or something like that.
Exactly, you didn't have a bona fide star in it, and I thought that served it well. Anyway, Swamp Thing. The comics that I loaned you, it was the Saga of the Swamp Thing, which is written by Alan Moore. I actually got these comics as part of a horror film class in college because the teacher was a huge comic book fan and wanted us to use it as a good representation of what horror is, and then, look at it as how is that interpreted to the screen. And I guess I'll just start off with, what did you think about it? As somebody who's not generally a fan of horror, the Saga of the Swamp Thing, especially those first couple trades, are almost, it's kind of the very definition of what horror is all of this unknown and stuff. What did you think of them?
See, I liked it. I mean, I think part of it is that I went into it wanting to like it because I'm a fan of Alan Moore in general. So even if it was not something that would have typically been something that I would have, read immediately, I find that it was something that I wanted to like, so I was eager to read. And yeah, I enjoyed it. I'm somewhat familiar with the TV show. I used to watch that somewhat when I was a kid. So
okay,
I have some just kind of like nostalgia enjoyment for the character of the Swamp Thing, even though I had never really read him as a character. And yeah, it is very much like a horror movie. It's got like, the Wendigo creature, and it's like ripping people to shreds and things like that. There's definitely a lot of that kind of element to it. But I felt sympathetic to his character. So, yeah. And the art is fantastic. I mean, it's so much fun to look at.
And here's the thing. That almost put me off. Like, that sort of almost psychedelic art style of the day, which is fantastic. The art is very impressive, but it almost made it harder for me to follow along because it was a day where you had these really different spreads. Like, it wasn't a standard layout of, comic book cells, where you have cell 1, cell 2, and, maybe you would have 4 panels on a page. I'm using the term cells and panels interchangeably here. Or sometimes you'd have a couple panels, and then the background all made one image along with sort of a wider one, the panel that basically didn't have boxes around it. And this was like weird painted. It was also like another Vertigo comic, which very much could be considered a horror comic in a lot of ways, Hellblazer. It was sort of that art style of the day, and it was almost harder for me to follow, which is odd because I talk about how much I like 30 Days of Night, but that was, this one story, well, granted, they spun it off into 80 different spin-offs and that sort of thing, but that style I had a little trouble with Swamp Thing, and I'm not sure why. Maybe it's something I need to revisit. Yeah,
it's definitely a little less well-defined. The creatures morph and change with their proportions in like a cell-by-cell basis sometimes. And, it might be part of the narrative, but it's definitely not, in Alex Ross kind of style, where everything is like exactly proportioned in a way that you are familiar with.
Right. The art is almost, well, it's more artistic almost, in that it's, if the proportions or something are different, it's because they're trying to affect your emotions in that way, make you confused or make you disoriented.
Yeah, and the paneling, just like how they present one panel to the next, is very atypical. It's not, this is one perfectly formed rectangle next to another perfectly formed rectangle. They're kind of angular and they bleed into each other sometimes and stuff like that.
Yeah, I mean, today, a lot of comics, you'll see modern comics, especially from the big two, almost read like storyboards for a film. You could almost pull those frames out shot for shot and film them, and it would look just fine, because that's what they're basically doing is they're directing a film in your head as you're watching the motions go through as you're looking panel to panel. Whereas something like Swamp Thing is like some of the earlier, Doctor Strange stuff, and where it's more trippy. It's out there, especially when they actually do trip. Like, is it in the first one where he pulls like the tuber off of him and has the woman eat it, and that's sort of their way of making love is they trip out together?
Yeah.
There's just some really different, weird stuff going on in those comics.
Yeah, and it's like a part of him. So yeah, it's definitely weird having a love story between a woman and a collection of swamp material. Yeah. Right,
because the way that Alan Moore sort of reworked the origin or the current status of Swamp Thing is that he was not Alec Holland. So the origin of Swamp Thing, scientist Alec Holland in an explosion, gets him and the chemicals get blown into a swamp, and then he reemerges as the Swamp Thing. Except we find out it's not actually him. His body is dead. Alec Holland is dead. And so Swamp Thing needs to come to terms with the fact that he's not this human anymore. He simply has the memories and personality of Alec Holland that sort of passed into the swamp itself.
Yeah.
And so he isn't actually one being so much as he's this elemental spirit that can inhabit all of
he's part of
nature.
The green.
Yes, and that's where we get the idea of the green, this whole network. And I actually read Brian K. Vaughan's Swamp Thing run recently, but it completely follows his daughter, which is its own sort of weird story of how Swamp Thing has a daughter. It was okay. It kind of meandered a bit, but his daughter was human-ish and had the abilities to connect to both the green and like humans as well, which eventually the Animal Man comics would get into, and they would call it the Red, which is this network of living creatures versus living plants. Really weird stuff, but I've heard good things about I think that's the New 52 Animal Man run where they talk about the Red. And I heard the New 52 Swamp Thing was actually really good too. I just haven't gotten to it yet.
Okay.
So in your mind, to wrap up, as somebody who's not, like, I basically just read off a giant list of things I came up with because I felt bad after last week's episode. And I like all of these comics for different reasons. But I'm also a fan of horror sometimes. I like good suspense stories, I think, more than traditional horror. But you are not a horror guy. You're not a big slasher movie guy. You're not a big, you're not I would say, a giant fan of alien movies, ghost movies, all the general tropey or
I enjoy
cliche.
The Alien franchise.
Yeah. Okay, but a lot of those turn more into action movies with horror elements.
The first one is clearly an action or a horror movie set in space,
right.
And then the second one is an action movie set in that same universe. So they're totally different tonal movies, but I like the Alien franchise. I enjoy vampires in a vague sense. I don't consume everything vampire related. My favorite thing horror related is the werewolf. I've always been a big fan of werewolf stuff.
Interesting.
But they don't make a ton of really good werewolf things.
Dog soldiers.
Okay. I also would like to sit down and watch start to finish An American Werewolf in London. Because that's a movie I've seen bits and pieces of, but I would like to see it all the way through.
But then you have to watch the sequel, An American Werewolf in Paris. It's not good.
That's what I hear.
I had that on VHS.
Ooh.
Back in the college days. Yeah, when you could get them for $1. I'm pretty sure that one was probably free.
Yeah, if you buy any other movie, just take this for free.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's not that you're not necessarily not a fan of horror. You're just not a big fan of horror, but it can still.
I'm more selective about my enjoyment of it.
Okay, so what makes a good horror comic then to you?
I definitely like something that has some suspense to it. I like something that maybe questions the nature of what it means to be, good or evil, human or not human, things like that. And if it just kind of it can also just be sort of fun, like sometimes it doesn't have to be very, in depth or artistic or anything like that. Just something that's kind of schlocky and fun. But
like the X-Men fighting Dracula.
Yes, that sounds like a lot of fun, even though it's ridiculous.
Right. Where you get Storm as a vampire for a short period of time because he tries to make her his queen, and Wolverine pops his claws in a cross to try and fend him off, but he doesn't actually believe. He's not religious, so it doesn't stop Dracula. And then Nightcrawler shows up with a cross because he's like a Catholic priest.
Oh yeah, but he's a demon already, so.
But he was able to fend off Dracula with the. I don't know where I have. It was an issue of, I want to say, X-Men Classics, where they were reprinting classic X-Men stories, where I have the X-Men Dracula comic. I have no idea if I still have that issue anywhere, but I thoroughly enjoyed it. It was sort of in the middle of this story. Or was it a one and done? I feel like it wasn't. I feel like it was like a second half of a story or something, but is that kind of what you're talking about?
Yeah.
I totally stole that from you, but sorry.
No, you're right. I would totally read that JLA versus the Aliens also. I think that sounds like it would be fun.
Okay. Well, I would say I would loan it to you, but I don't know that you would ever read it.
How about I come over to your place and I'll just sit down and read it there?
That's better. That I can appreciate.
Yeah.
Is there anything last? We've been running on for quite a while here. Are there any last thoughts that you had as far as horror comics are concerned?
No. Yeah. That about does it.
All right. So, how about this? From all the different ones that I had mentioned for our poll list, which will go poll list, just to do it. Which of those would you be most interested in reading of the ones that I suggested? We'll call that our poll list for the week.
That Alien versus JLA is the one that really sticks out.
Well, that was
to
Predator. That was JLA versus Predator.
Yeah.
Okay.
That one sticks out. Although the Wolverine versus Dracula sounds pretty great too.
Okay. So that, again, I will try and find that and put a picture up on Twitter then. And I'll do it for both of those. I don't know where you would find that issue of X-Men Classics, but I bet that JLA versus Predator you could probably find in a cheap, like, trade bin somewhere, because the cover looks ridiculous. It's literally like the JLA standing around, except they're predators. Like, it's kind of ridiculous, and the premise is kind of ridiculous.
Seeing Wonder Woman as a gorilla would also be pretty wonderful.
Like I said, that is such a weird comic, man.
Yeah.
But I was buying them. I was like, if it said Elseworlds on it, and I found it, especially if I found it in like a half-off bin at a comic shop, you bet I was picking up any Elseworlds I could find that was Batman or Justice League or Superman, actually. There's some really good Superman Elseworlds out there as well. Yeah, but I don't think I have any that are horror.
Green Lantern one where it's like he has like a real lantern. It was a few issues that were Elseworlds. So it was like a real magic-based thing as opposed to being like aliens. So yeah, it was. There's some cool Green Lantern Elseworld stuff out there too.
Yeah, no, maybe we'll have to do an Elseworlds episode where we just break down some of our favorite Elseworlds, or I'll just do what I did this time and just name off all of the ones that I have, which are many. All right, well, I guess we will call that good for this week. Why don't you bring us into the end of the show there, Liam?
End of the show.
Nice. All right, so we're going to close the comic box for now. Liam, thank you for joining me.
Of course. Thanks for having me back.
Yep. If you wanted to send us your ideas of what to call AquaBro or however we're calling him, or Broquaman, Dudequaman, you can hit us up on Twitter at ComicBoxCast or email us at thecomicboxpodcast@gmail.com. You can talk to us on everywhere. We are part of the Geek to Geek podcast network, so you can find us on Slack. Your invite link there would be slack.geektogeekcast.com. You could find us on Reddit, which is /r/Geek2Geekcast. On Facebook, if you search Geek to Geekcast. We are all over the place. And so I feel like a lot of our discussion lately has been on the Slack channel rather than the subreddit or on Facebook. But as always, I try and mix it up and post everywhere. And of course, Twitter. Twitter is always a place where there's a lot of conversation going on. So feel free to hit us up. Liam, I will have your contact. I always have. I don't know if you know this. Your contact info is always in the show notes.
Good.
So you can feel free to hit Liam up on Facebook, or what's the other one that I have for you? Steam, I guess, and Reddit.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's it. So next week, we'll see if I can snag Dr. Ray. Otherwise, I don't know. We're going to keep talking about horror comics. So I don't know what's in store. Maybe I'll just dive into something specific. Like I have lots of vampire comics, some which are not very good. We'll do that.
Me. You mean they made a graphic novelization of the Twilight franchise?
I don't know. I don't have that. I do have the graphic novelization of the Underworld movies, and some of those are pretty bad.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
I got all sorts of bad stuff. I got all sorts of stuff, Liam. I got all sorts of stuff. Please remember to rate and subscribe, because that's how we spread info about this show. Don't forget to listen to the other Geek to Geek podcast shows, or find out more about those at GeektoGeekCast.com. Liam, kick it one more time.
Bum 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 bum.
Ba ba boom ba da boom. That wasn't scary. We didn't. There it is. I was gonna say we're not doing a good job of being scary at all. Could have at least done like an Alien or Predator theme, but I don't know what either of those are.
Or a...
Well, I did that last week. You missed out on that.
Oh, yeah, I suppose.
All right. Bye, everybody. We'll see you next week.
Bye-bye.